Since it's spooky month and I love horror a ton, I thought it'd be fun to look into the various spooks and scares Weekly Shonen Jump has to offer. Being a shonen magazine, it isn't all that well known for its horror manga specifically, but there are a couple spooky manga in its library, as well as a lot of manga that take influence from the supernatural and the horrific in its overall catalogue, which we'll look at today. To start with, let's look at one of Shonen Jump's biggest and most popular manga currently, Jujutsu Kaisen. If you've ever read one chapter of JJK, you'll know it's steeped in the supernatural, with Yuji and friends messing with the Ouija board in the first few pages. My favourite aspects of JJK's horror is how it mixes its urban myths and legends with the traditional yokai elements you'd come to expect from most Japanese horror media, with the beginning arcs really feeling like they relish in their horror inspirations, interweaving old and new, spooky and scary elements seamlessly. One of the less talked about creepy things in JJK is during the death painting arc, where the main trio visit Yasuhachi Bridge, known for its suicides as well as paranormal activity. Surrounding the bridge have been a number of disappearances, with the trio investigating them and leading them to fight the Curse Womb death paintings, Eso and Kuchizu. I really just like how they interweave the ideas of spirits with local legends about haunted bridges. And on the topic of haunted bridges, I want to talk to you about a haunted bridge from where I'm from, the Devil's Bridge, a series of 3 bridges over the River Mynach in Ceredigion County, Wales. Other than being very interesting from an architectural standpoint, as the 3 bridges are built on top of each other, it's also tied to a darker legend involving an older woman who wants to retrieve one of her cows, which has somehow found its way across the gorge. In her time of need, the devil would appear and offer her a deal. He would build a bridge for her, although the cost would be the first soul of a living thing that crosses the bridge. Even under these conditions though, the old woman agreed with the devil, sealing the deal. The devil, hoping to get the old woman's soul, would actually end up with her dogs, as she threw some food out on the bridge first for the dog to eat, and so she would beat the devil, but at what cost? Other similar stories exist surrounding the bridge, and there's some similarities with other cursed bridges around the world, with the Overton Bridge coming to mind, also in the UK, and it's known as the Dog Suicide Bridge, another highly supernatural coded bridge that's a little upsetting to look into, so look at it at your own risk. Perhaps you were expecting something on Sukuna or Mahito, or some other minor curses, but no, have some cursed bridges. Next, we're going to tackle a manga you've likely never read, but is one of my favorites, Muhyo and Roji's Bureau of Spiritual Investigation. Muhyo and Roji follows the titular characters working at their own little supernatural bureau, offering to help others with ghostly problems and such. While the premise might seem pretty basic at first, I think Muhyo and Roji has a lot going for it. Firstly is its art style. It's so unique and in some ways cutesy, but it's balanced out by some of the creepier expressions characters like Muhyo make, as well as some of the creature designs which are absolutely astounding and creepy. For some reason, it reminds me of Professor Layton in how cartoony the characters are, with often exaggerated proportions and being half cute and half ominous. The other thing I really like about Muhyo and Roji is it has a more unorthodox way of tackling these ghosts. Instead of fighting them head on with super cool special moves like most shonen would, the characters actually use magical lore to defeat them, so it's also an attorney series in a weird way. Another win if you like puzzle-based visual novels like me.
It's nuts.
Even though you don't get super flashy battles, I find the pacing of Muhyo and Roji really nice, mainly focused on building up its confrontations and the characters surrounding them, their reactions and emotions concerning the spirits. It helps make every spirit and every encounter fresh and interesting. For the most part, it's also quite relaxing and calm, but there's always this small ominous feeling, and things in the corner of your eye catch your attention and keep you on edge as you read. It also gets more exciting as bigger arcs begin and the world gets more fleshed out, with my favourite part being the relationship between Muhyo and Roji overall, which is a really well done and unique portrayal of friendship and a student-teacher dynamic. If Muhyo and Roji seems at all appealing, or if the art has caught your eye, I heavily recommend you check it out, and I plan to talk about it more in the future as it's a series I love, which I think is heavily underrated. If you're familiar with the history of Shonen Jump series I've made, you might know about this one already, but Jump actually has one of the most influential horror manga in its roster, 1974's Yokai Hunter by Daijiro Morihoshi. It only had a short run going on for 5 chapters, with the eventual volumes release containing another short horror story by Morihoshi named The Living City. Yokai Hunter would go on to have multiple spin-offs in the future, and with it, Morihoshi's work would go on to inspire creators like Hideaki Anno and Hayao Miyazaki. The story would follow Haida Reijiro, a professor of archaeology with an interest in the occult, holding strong beliefs in the supernatural, gods and demons, most of which appear throughout the short series. Because of his interests and theories, he was excommunicated by the Japanese Archaeologist Association and aimed to prove them wrong by traveling the country in order to find evidence of yokai. The first story involves Haida-sensei investigating the Hiroko burial mound in a small town, where we find Yabe Masao, a child whose father went into the local burial chamber in one of the mounds one night, only to be found the next morning without a head. The two investigate the Hiroko burial mounds, reading up on it, before going there themselves, and they use a spell to open a secret door in the rock face. They then descend deep down a set of stone-carved stairs until they reach an underground gorge, and deep down it at the bottom of the gorge is hundreds of disfigured creatures. That's where we're gonna stop. Since Yokai Hunter is such a short manga, it might be worth reading yourself. It's also entirely fan translated too, so you can read the entire volume. I think Morihoshi's approach to horror is interesting. It's dense and steeped in myth and religious text, something even more evident in Ankoku Shinwa, another jump horror series by Morihoshi and one you might like if you find yourself enjoying Yokai Hunter. In some respects, Yokai Hunter surrounds itself with the horror of the existential on a cosmic scale, almost Lovecraftian, where there are beings far more powerful and beyond our imagination. It's something you actually might not expect to have originated from Jump, and a really interesting manga to have in the magazine's history.
You tell an alien, you stand right there, alien, I'd like you to sing the alien national anthem. And they're like, quack, 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 quack. And then you show them, you videotape them, and you show them doing that, they're gonna go, and their head's gonna fucking explode.
Another one of the more recent examples of horror within Jump is Kayu Shirai and Posuke Demizu's Promised Neverland. And if you haven't read it, you might have heard of its especially bad second season of anime or its lackluster manga ending, which is a shame because its first arc is perhaps one of the best manga arcs ever, and definitely one of the scariest. Gracefield House starts with Emma and her whole family living happily at the orphanage. It's where they've grown up happily with their loving mother as one big happy family. It's bright and fun, although there's hints that things aren't quite what they seem. Slightly off-putting things like the daily tests they have to participate in, but otherwise everything is all sunshine and rainbows, with the kids having fun, playing tag and enjoying themselves. One day when one of the children, Connie, is about to get adopted, Emma and Norman, another one of the older children, notice she's left behind her prized stuffed animal and decide they're going to sneak out of the house and return it to her before she leaves for good. And major spoilers here for the Promised Neverland, although this is the chapter 1 hook. They do eventually find Connie by the gates of the orphanage, although she isn't exactly alive and is covered in a pool of her own blood with a flower stabbed into her heart. She's then stuffed into a container by these demonic entities to be eaten later on as the equivalent of a free-range delicacy. Here, Emma and Norman's worlds are flipped upside down. Everything they've known about since birth has been a lie. The home they felt safe in, the love their mother has given to them, thought to be unconditional, and even their entire existence. The Promised Neverland isn't just a horror thriller at this point, but a pure piece of existential horror that asks Emma not only how does she get out of this situation alive, but how does she get out of this with her entire family, including children that can barely even walk. This nightmare scenario is what made The Promised Neverland so enthralling at its beginning, and regardless of what comes next, Gracefield House is worth reading just for this. Some of its ideas, particularly the factory farming of humans for meat, I find especially disturbing and depressing. They're visceral and really shocked me when I first read it, and now they hit me even more as a vegan because of their links to battery farms. It taps into some real horrible and existential stuff, which I wish it was given more time to explore, but what we got was pretty good and pretty creepy. For our next two manga, I want to touch on the death games of Jump. These two being Siren and Enigma. Siren is the more well-known of the two, coming in at 145 chapters, and a lot of people might point out that the true horror of Siren is despite its long run, it never got an anime. But its initial premise is rooted in horror and is really interesting. It follows Ageha Yoshina, a high school student who one day answers a randomly ringing phone booth on his way home. From it, he gets an odd phone card with the name Siren on, and a mystery begins brewing, getting deeper almost immediately as a girl from his school disappears shortly after. Ageha tries to investigate the Siren urban legend, which is tied into these vanishings. Some people think it's a secret society, and Ageha, while researching, is warned to not look further into it. He does so, however, and returns to the phone booth, answers a bunch of questions, and is soon attacked by a couple of weirdos who really rough him up. At his limit, he calls out for help on his phone, only to be transported to a deserted land he's unfamiliar with. The first chapter of Siren is gripping, full of mystery, and the plot hook of being transported to this alternate world is really creepy. Siren goes on to tap into the fear of being stuck somewhere you're unfamiliar with, as well as somewhere really dangerous. There's also some really cool creature designs, and it finds the time to tap into some more apocalyptic elements, as well as fears concerning the environment. I won't spoil too much though, as it's a really interesting read, and this is another one you can read on the Shonen Jump app. While Siren is less classical in its portrayal of the death game, Enigma is much closer to what you might think when the concept is brought up. Hayaba, Sumino, and 6 other individuals are brought together in the school gymnasium, and despite it being 11 AM, it's still pitch black outside, and this is when Enigma introduces himself on screen with the image of a weird patchwork skull. Enigma reveals the 7 will participate in something called the E-test, where they must escape the school within a 72-hour period. Classic death game stuff here, but there's also the stipulation that a shadow will be pursuing them, something that I actually found pretty scary, as later on the school's announcement system states, "Takahashi-san has arrived. Would the students please come quickly to meet him? I repeat, Takahashi-san has arrived." With one of the characters revealing that this is a secret code for a degenerate infiltrating the school. And this horror of someone infiltrating a safe space, I find really creepy, and it's made even more creepy when he's just overtaken by a shadow. While Enigma as a whole is a bit messy, it does nail the death game atmosphere in its early chapters and has some suitably creepy moments later on, like a villain called Cannibal who turns people into little bits of people-sized steak and eats them, and then leaves behind trash bags full of human flesh, which I think is pretty metal for a shonen manga.
Hello. I'm sorry to call you at this hour. Can I speak to Tomomi? Tomomi? Ain't no Tomomi girl living here, so what?
Get your crackhead ass into some rehab. I ain't got time for this bullshit.
Motherfucker!
Hey, Satsuki, I believe you've got another call coming through.
What in the sweet hells were you thinking, activating that lance? I was right there! Gods! Do you have any idea how much that hurt?
Our last manga we're going to touch on today is one of my favorites of all time, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1 Phantom Blood. JoJo overall is no stranger to horror and its influence, with Araki being a fan of the genre, and you'll see that throughout the entire series of manga in every part. Stands being a prime example, them being supernatural beings with often creepy appearances and abilities. And there's way too many to list. You could probably make hours of JoJo horror content on every part, and that's because Araki's love of horror is deep, with him even having a book full of his horror movie analysis called Hirohiko Araki's Bizarre Horror Movie Analysis. It also has some really cool little doodles of real horror movies attached in it, and it's something I'd love to read one day if it gets an English translation. What I will touch on more in depth though is perhaps one of my personal favorite things surrounding horror, that being vampires. Phantom Blood sits in a weird place for JoJo and manga fans, often being cast by the wayside and being people's least favorite part, with a lot of people citing that it's short and simple, but I think that works in its favor, as Phantom Blood is actually a really nice short gothic vampire story, probably one of the best vampire manga even in my opinion, and if you think there are better, let me know because I'd love to read more vampire stuff.
I'm afraid that something is wrong with me, because this whole time I've been in love with my brother.
Bruh.
From its Victorian setting and Araki's early and gorgeous artwork emerges this beautiful story of these two brothers, the rich, kind-hearted gentleman Jonathan Joestar and the poor, cunning and self-serving Dio Brando. We see them grow up together, always at odds, with Dio constantly lusting for more, eventually leading him to don the iconic stone mask and becoming a vampire. Dio as a character in part 1 is one of my favorites, not just as a villain, but as a character. He's unabashedly evil and always tries to outdo his brother, and he makes for a delightful villain and foil to Jonathan. He isn't afraid to flaunt his power, wealth, or style, sending various powerful lackeys to stop Jonathan, and I know that's a shonen trope, but it's perfect for a vampire. I love how Araki has melded traditional shonen ideas with the idea of a gothic vampire story. And that's one of the biggest reasons I love Dio as well. He's a naturally great fit to be a vampire, having all the vanity and evil traits, but also a human aspect to him, which I feel is understated and not talked about too much. To me, Dio Brando is someone who's never experienced true love or kindness. Hardened by the world around him, by his father and society as a whole, it molded him into a selfish beast. But when we get to the end of part 1, where him and Jonathan are in the boat and Jonathan's clutching onto his head, I can't help but think that perhaps deep down what Dio might have needed most was companionship, family, and love. It goes against his character and it's definitely not explicit. This reading is very much my own, and I think a lot of people will twist their heads at my idea here, but I love thinking about Dio in this way. He's so monstrous, but there's this speck of humanity within him at this point, and I think that speck of humanity is what makes him such a great vampire. Vampires being creatures that are so intertwined with the human experience, a lot of modern and older stories using them to explore various aspects about us, from loneliness to lust and sexuality, and our strong desire to live and be fruitful. Forgive me if this section has been a bit self-indulgent, but I love Dio and Phantom Blood so much, and I couldn't resist talking about it a little bit since this is a horror themed video. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive list of horror themed manga and Jump. There's new series like Fabricant 100 alluding to works like Frankenstein, or Phantom Seer, which has some phenomenal creepy illustration. There's also older manga like One Piece and its thriller Bark arc, Death Note, which definitely veers into a horror thriller territory at times, and the spiritual Nura Rise of the Yokai Clan. We can even go back farther and look at works like Ayatsuri Sakon or Jigoku Sensei Nube, which I haven't yet read but would love to. Perhaps next year I can cover a different set of spooky manga for the Halloween season. Let me know what you'd like to see in the future, or what your favorite spooky manga is from Jump, or even outside of Jump. I'd love to know. But I hope this video has shown you that there is some good spooky manga in Jump, and if you're in the mood for it, please read some. Also, a reminder that the majority of these are on the Shonen Jump app and are officially translated. It's good to go down that route if you can, and I'll leave a link to the Viz website in the description. If you've enjoyed this video, I also have a bunch of other ones on various Jump series, including my History of Shonen Jump videos, which cover Jump from its very beginning. As always, thank you so much for watching, remember to be kind to each other, and take care.